hammocks or tents. In today's video, we're not going to solve the problem of hammocks versus tents. We're simply going to talk about some pros and cons of each respective setup and dive into some of the most important details of why you would choose one over the other. In this video, I'll be taking out the Durston X-Mid 1, the budget-friendly edition, and my Superior Gear hammock and hammock gear tarp. This ought to do for camp just fine. So I think right here is going to be my spot. Beautiful spot, big rock face over here. So I'm going to set up my hammock here, but before we do, let's talk about a couple of pros and cons of finding a campsite with a hammock. The pros obviously are you don't need perfectly level ground, you just need two trees that are spaced appropriately apart. But the con to that is obviously just that, you need trees. Where am I going to put my hammock out here? You need them to be the right space and enough ground to set up a tarp and things of that nature. And always be sure you're looking for widowmakers, tent or hammock. And obviously out here in the Badlands, as you can see, there's a few junipers and things of that nature, but hammock trees are very few and far between. So a tent is almost 100% necessary out here unless you know exactly where you're going to find these very hard to find trees. So that's a big pro for tents, is you can set them up on flat ground anywhere. And as a matter of fact, sometimes they're nicer to find the epic spot to set the tent where you might have the most dynamic views at camp. I hope the wind isn't screwing up this audio too much. So we won't dive into complexities today, but I believe setting up a hammock, talking about setup, is easier than a tent personally. Number one, it's just essentially two straps around two trees, and then you clip your hammock on, tighten it up to your liking, and there you go. So that is the hammock, and I might do some tweaks later, but it probably took me maybe 2 minutes. Obviously, you're going to need protection from the elements, specifically rain, wind, all sorts of things. Now, a hammock will have far better ventilation, but with that comes more wind and things like that in your shelter itself, which is why it's essential to have some form of insulation underneath. One of the pros with a hammock, to me, is the rainfly itself can be set up first. So if it is raining or it's super windy or something like that, you can set this up first to provide some sort of relief from those elements and have a lot more room to unpack your gear free of moisture. ASMR zippers. With a hammock tarp, there's several different ways you can pitch it. Tonight I don't think is going to be a real big deal wind-wise, so I'm going to pitch it high so I can essentially kind of stand underneath it, which is another pro for hammocks. The Durston sets up with a minimum of 4 stakes, which I do not find ideal because I like to stake out the vestibules. And if you really want it to get tied down for wind, it requires 8. So that's kind of another con. More stakes equals more weight. But con is that's only step 1. Now I got to blow up an air mattress and do all that jazz. Now this segment leads us to why I first started looking into hammocks in the first place. Inflating, and even worse, deflating a sleeping pad. It's just a pain in the neck. Excuse me. I couldn't find my flex tail pump, the lazy man's way to do it. A con for most hammocks is they use down insulation, which is a con in general because if it gets wet, it could be a trip-ending catastrophe. But it's the same con with a tent, because if you lose your insulated sleeping pad, unless you're above about 55, 60 degrees, you're going to be in real trouble of hypothermia. Now with a hammock, you don't need much for a pillow. Oftentimes just a puffy coat will work, a cheap insulated pillow. Some people don't even care if they have a pillow or not in a hammock. In a tent, however, you really got to up your pillow game. And tonight, in true Dan Becker fashion, I brought to the Xped Mega Pillow and what I think is the best pillow and one of the cheapest, the Thermarest whatever pillow with recycled fabrics. Really bulky, but the most comfortable pillow I think I own. So the Durston is set up. This Durston, by the way, is the more budget-friendly version. It's not Dyneema, and the 1P I think is right around $240. So an excellent tent for that price. And it's really quite quick to set up. I would say that didn't take me much longer than it did my hammock and tarp. And I really do like it as much as I dog on tents in general. Another hammock pro, you can't argue this, is that I don't have to get up off the ground. All I have to do is just kick my legs out and sit up and kick on my shoes. And that's especially nice when you gotta get up to pee. And if you smoke cigars or cannabis, there's a lot better ventilation, unless you're the hotboxing type. One of my favorite pros about a tent over a hammock is what I like to call the fort factor. You feel like you're more in like a fort. And I don't care how old you are, everybody likes a fort. It also gives you kind of a sense of security, albeit a false sense of security, to kind of be more covered up and private. Cooking, no brainer, much easier in a hammock and arguably safer. Number one, with your vestibule closed, if it's raining or something like that, you could safely do it if you're really careful, but a lot of burns and gear damage happens because of it. And furthermore, you can get condensation in your tent, especially if it's closed up when you're cooking. So hammocking beats a tent in the culinary category. This is not a bad way to spend an afternoon. Look at that view. Wouldn't have that from a tent. All right, maybe I fibbed a little bit about the view being better from a hammock. Both of these systems are within ounces of each other at right around 4.5 pounds, with everything included. That includes the hammock, the straps, the stuff sacks, the stakes, the tarp, the quilt, the pillow, and the tent case, the tent, the poles, the sleeping pad, the quilt, the pillows. So a tent versus a hammock when it comes to warmth. That's really dependent on the gear that you choose, R-value of your sleeping pad, temperature rating of your bag or your underquilt, etc. So that's kind of a wash. But I do personally feel that getting into a hammock, you get warm quicker. I think that might just be because you're wrapped in down from the underside. And I just feel like I get warmer faster in a hammock, while as in a tent, it takes me a little while to warm up. So I'll be damned. Been a nice day. But perhaps the ultimate question is, how am I going to sleep? Well, let's save that for morning, and I'll tell you exactly what I prefer to sleep in and why. Morning. So really quickly, let's talk about packing up. Tent versus hammock. Now, they both have their advantages. I like packing up in a tent because I can sit right here in bed and pack up the majority of my stuff without leaving the comfort of my quilt. But a hammock is generally going to be a drier situation. You don't have to deal with mud on the bottom of it, moisture, that type of thing. So I prefer to pack up a hammock just because I don't have anything on the ground. If it happens to be wet or muddy, it's obviously going to be a bigger mess. Let's wrap this up, shall we? Kind of like Jerry Springer used to do. In the debate of hammock versus tent, personally, if I'm given the opportunity, I'm probably going to choose a hammock every time. And the reason for that is the most important factor to me: sleep. I get better sleep in a hammock. Again, no numb shoulders, no numb hips. I get a little bit warmer in it faster. I find it easier to set up, and I don't like to get up off the ground. But that being said, I still have an affinity for tents. They're fun. Like I said, I love the fort factor. I love the security that it provides, even though we all know if something decides to come through those tent walls, they're probably going to succeed. But that being said, again, tents are fun. They're a lot of fun. They're a little bit messier to clean up. You got to get up off the ground, and maybe you don't sleep quite as well. But I will always keep tents in my arsenal of backpacking gear, just because the variety is the spice of life. So if you're new to backpacking or looking at making a switch from a tent to a hammock or vice versa, my recommendation is try one before you buy one. And the reason for that is everybody's different, and that's what makes the world a special place. So that's really all I have to say in today's video. It's always a pleasure having you guys along with me, and I hope to see you real soon. Bye.